So this is my Ricoh Diacord G medium format twin lens reflex camera. So if I cock and fire this camera, you see how slowly the blades open and close in there? That's because there's oil on the blades and it's slowing the blade movement down. So what I want to do is to get the shutter mechanism, the entire shutter assembly and lens assembly out, and remove the glass elements to give me access to the shutter blades. And then I'm just going to try to remove as much of that oil as I can and see if that does the job. So to start with, there are several screws around here. Well, actually, to start with, there's a plastic or a leather, fake leather covering, sort of like this stuff, that's on top of here that covers the screws. But I've already removed that, as you can see. That's why it looks kind of crummy around this edge. It doesn't have the finishing material it's supposed to have. So the next step is to take these screws out. There's here, 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 and I can't see from where I'm sitting, here and here. I'm going to pull those 5 screws out. Okay, with those 5 screws removed, I should be able to lift this cover off. But what I'm going to have to do that is move the self-timer mechanism over to where it can fit in the slot. I doubt you can see that on video, but if you had one of these cameras in my hand, you would see what I mean. So with the timer moved, maybe? Oh, I missed a screw. Sorry. Now let's try that again. That lifts out, and then you have to kind of slip it out slightly to get off of the cocking lever. And this cover is now out of your way. So I took a moment to switch to the macro lens so you can see a little more detail of what's going on here. Before we go any farther, I can show you how this little thing works. So this camera, let me slide that out of the way there. This is, if you recall, the front cover that goes around the lenses. On the top of it is what you look at to see your aperture. See, I'm changing the aperture here. And your shutter speed. And that is just a couple of geared rings inside of here. That's the aperture. And that's the shutter speed. You see this little sort of a post right here, this little hook? That hooks into a point on the shutter. So you can see this is actually just kind of a normal shutter that you might find in any other camera. You can change the shutter speed just by rotating this, and that dot shows what it's currently set to. But it has this little post right here that slips into that hook. So when you move this lever and change the shutter speed indicated on the camera, you're moving that little hook around, which is connected to this post, and therefore moves this ring and changes the shutter speed. The aperture works via a very similar mechanism. So this top lens here is the viewing lens. This is the one that you see through when you look in the view screen of the camera. I could unscrew this and take it out. It's just threaded in. I don't really have any reason to. But the way this works is when you point your camera at something, the light from the scene goes in this lens and hits a mirror back in here and then reflects upwards and comes out on the view screen. So if I shine my flashlight in that lens right now, you'll see the light hitting the view screen. And if I tip this back upright and we look at the viewing lens itself, so if I shine my light in the view screen, we can see that light coming back out through the lens. That's the viewing lens setup. And this is the taking lens along with the shutter assembly. So we want to remove this from the camera itself. This has a couple of wires going to it normally that accounts for the, what do you call it, hot shoe, flash hot shoe. But they're not hooked up in this camera. These wires are broken off, and I've never really cared about fixing it because I don't really intend to use a flash with this camera. This is retained. If we go back to the back and open the film door, let me focus. More light, maybe? It's pretty dark in there. This is retained on the inside by this ring. You can maybe see, it's quite dark. You can see there's some slots in here, and into that you're going to stick a spanner wrench, and then you can unscrew this retaining ring, and then the shutter will come out. So with the retaining ring loose, it can be lifted out right here, And this little sort of, I don't even know what you call this. This sort of funnel, light funnel, can come out as well. Set those to the side. And now, pick up the camera body. The shutter stays there. So I'm going to start with unscrewing this front element here. And I want to be careful not to lose the orientation of any of these elements. It's kind of hard to lose this one because it's got writing on the front. But I'm going to set them to the side, face up, so that I remember which way they go into the camera. Flip it over, and there is also this rear element here. So I'm going to need my little spanner tool. And that lets me turn that. And now that it's loose, I should be able to turn it with my fingers. And again, I'm going to set this aside in a way that I know how to put it back. So here we are, glassless shutter. You can see those are the set of blades closest to us are the aperture blades. So if I turn the aperture adjustment on the shutter, you can see those open up and close down. And then the other set of blades still inside there, those are the shutter blades. So if I cock the shutter, and then trip this little lever right here, it opens and closes. Does bulb mode work on this? I don't actually know. Let's change the shutter speed to bulb mode. The answer is yes, bulb mode does work. So it's going to hold the shutter open until I release that lever, and then it'll close. However, you can see how sort of slowly it opens and closes. It's supposed to be very, very snappy and quick, and it's not. So here's the thing. I want to clean the oil off of those blades. You're not supposed to touch these blades. You will see that advice in a lot of places online. Don't touch aperture blades. They're very fragile. You can damage them. We're going to touch these blades, but we're going to try to be gentle about it. So I've got me some rubbing alcohol and a lens cloth, and what I'm going to try to do is use the lens cloth on my fingers, and if I touch it from if I touch from the bottom, so I've got a finger going in here, and from the top at the same time, and I'm not going to do any kind of twisting rubbing motion. I'm just going to gently squeeze and dab off the oil, and that gets a little bit of oil off. And then I'm going to use a cotton swab to put a little bit of rubbing alcohol on there and operate the shutter a couple times so that it works the alcohol through and works as kind of a solvent for the oil. Then I'm going to dab again, and then I'm going to repeat this. And I'm going to keep repeating until I work most of the oil out of the shutter. I fully expect to be doing this for like 20 or 30 minutes, and you don't want to watch that probably. So I'm going to cut the camera off and go watch something on TV while I do this, and I'll come back when I'm done. Okay, I'm back. If I cock it now and trip the button, it's actually very, very fast and snappy, just as it should be. It's probably too fast for you to actually see on camera, because a 1/400th shutter speed on this shutter, trying to shoot it with a 1/60th of a second shutter speed on that camera, it probably isn't even visible on camera. So let's take it down to a 1/2 second exposure so you can see it. Now, if you remember before how slowly it would open and close, you could actually see the shutter blades moving as they open and close. If I do it now, you can see that they do open and close, but the actual motion of them opening and closing is too fast to see. That's exactly what we want. That's a nice, snappy, quick shutter. So I'm going to call this repaired for the moment. Maybe repaired isn't quite the right word. A full repair would probably be taking this whole thing apart and cleaning every bit of oil out of the inside of it. But we're going to call it good enough to use, and that's all I really care about. So now I'm going to start reassembling, and it's just the reverse order of the disassembly. So we start with the lens elements again. This is the rear lens element, and I'm going to give this a little bit of an alcohol wipe and clean while I have it out. That's pretty good. So we'll thread that back into the back here. And the front lens element, same deal. So if you look on the back of the shutter, there's a little brass post sticking out right here. And that goes into this little U-shaped piece of metal here. That's sort of a key to make sure you install it correctly. But there's one other thing you want to make sure you get right while you put this in. You remember this is the button that triggers the shutter. And when this shutter is installed in the body, that button should be triggered by pushing this button, which pivots this little lever right here. So you want to make sure that this lever is over to catch that and not behind it like that. We'll reinstall that light cone and retaining ring that we took out earlier. It's actually quite awkward to do while filming at the same time. Trying to hold the camera in a spot where, or trying to hold the Ricoh in a spot where the recording camera can see it and where I can see what I'm doing. I think I'm kind of failing at both at the moment. There we go, tight. So, if we did that correctly, then I should be able to cock the shutter and then push this button to fire it. Awesome, works. Now all that we have left is to slip this cover back in place. If you recall, I was talking earlier that the back of that cover has some keys that need to mesh into pieces onto the shutter so that the shutter speed and aperture indicator on the cover reads correctly. I happen to know, because I'm sitting here looking at the shutter, that I have it set to 1/400th shutter speed. And I know because I checked when I was assembling the shutter that the iris is completely open. So I'm going to take this cover and I'm going to dial it in for 1/400th shutter speed with the aperture wide open, which happens to be f3.5. So these gears should be set correctly to mesh now. Remember, we had to have the self-timer open up just a little bit in order to make this go together. And then we're just going to kind of do the finagling required to get this cover back down and in place. So now the cover is on, and it is in fact reading 1/400th of a second f3.5. All that's left now is all those screws around the edges that we originally took off. So I'm going to start putting those screws back in now. And there you have it. We are done here. We have a good functioning camera again. Quick, snappy sounding shutter. Too fast to even see the blades move. See if bulb mode works. Bulb mode works too. It's bulb mode. 1 second. Half second. Let's open it at bulb mode and just hold it open for a second. Iris works as well. So we're good to go here. Camera fixed.